You're listening to The Stark Truth with Robert Stark. Visit us on the web at www.starktruthradio.com.
This is Robert Stark. I'm joined here with Epiphora. Epiphora, it is great having you on the show.
Thanks, great to be here.
And I'm also joined here with my co-host, Pilliter.
Hi, Epiphora.
Hi.
Epiphora, you're an artist. How long have you been working on art?
So I guess as far as visual art goes, I'm relatively new. I started doing digital art over this past summer. So I'm about 6 months in. Before that, I did poetry and internet performance art.
And what kind of internet performance art did you do?
Yeah, so I guess I don't know how familiar you guys are with like weird Facebook or whatever, but I had a Facebook account under a name that was not mine, and I didn't have any personal information on it. And I friended a bunch of people and basically just started having conversations. And,
like making up a character.
Yeah, exactly.
I've done that, but like a really long time ago. Like I must have been like 18.
Oh, word. Yeah. And I sort of discovered that social media is actually like a really excellent outlet for performance art because it specifically already has that kind of like character setup. So I took advantage of that.
By this, do you mean like similar to trilling, or more interested in creating a character like an actor and getting to sort of know people from the standpoint of the character, or is it just kind of like trilling?
It's the latter. I mean, I started out sort of trolling, I think, just like, I mean, the real motivating factor behind starting that account was to have an account that wasn't associated with my name, where I could post like off-color jokes and whatnot and just add a few of my friends. But I started friending people who weren't in my immediate social circle. And I had a bunch of message conversations with people who would, ask who I was, and I would refuse to tell them just because I didn't want people to know. And then people started getting like incredibly angry or very intrigued, and I found those conversations really funny and interesting. And so what I would do was I would start screen capping message conversations between people, and I'd black out their name, and then I'd post the conversations and people would comment on them. And so at first it sort of started out as sort of like an outlet for my friends who knew me to like laugh at weird interactions that I had online. And then it, as it expanded, became like something much more strange, where without me having much of a plan or intention behind it, people started interpreting what I was doing as like a esoteric project that had like a secret teaching in it. And a lot of people would message me and say like what I was doing was incredibly important. And like, I didn't really understand where that came from, but I started to get much more invested in it once that happened.
Can you give an example of one of the most outrageous examples of one of these interactions that you've posted?
Let me think. So this was a little over a year ago. I guess the ones that are like particularly strange, but also very interesting are ones where people get very attached to the character and like will message me long descriptions of their dreams. or ask me questions about like, what do I think happens after you die? Stuff like it became very philosophically rich very quickly. I would try to inspire those types of conversations to happen by like pretending that I was a bot or like a piece of AI and like seeing what would happen in a message conversation if I did that, and then like pretending that I was an art project inspired by like Pascal or something, and see what would happen with that. And I'd look up staff on radio shows that I was interested in, or writers or artists that I was interested in, and I would friend them. And for like this goes for everybody, but especially for artists of a certain stature, you're more likely to get your friend request accepted if you if you have a lot of mutual friends with them. So I would look at their friends list and then friend maybe 30 of their friends, and then go and friend the actual person I was interested in having.
Also, if you have like a common interest, like if you're in a certain art scene or a political subculture, but if you just add a random person that you have no connection to, they're gonna kind of just obviously not add you. Right.
Yeah. And I would do this like with colleges too, like go to students who I knew at UChicago and then friend all of their friends and sort of like pose as a UChicago student. And I know people there who like thought that the person behind the account was a student at their college and so on. So like there are various ways to appear as if you're in one social scene or another.
What was the sort of persona of the characters that you made up?
So I didn't have a backstory or anything. It was pretty much like what you see is what you get. Like my timeline, I would use like very mystical language to like imply that like my timeline was like my being or some sort of thing like that, trying to draw attention away from me as an artist behind the project, and more put focus on like the project itself as something outside of like whoever's running the profile.
I'm looking at some of your art right now, and it does remind me of that whole video glitch or video synthesis. Are you interested in that?
Yeah. That's definitely like a huge inspiration as far as like my visual art goes. I started out using Photoshop over the summer, and I was terrible at it, but I sat with it for a long time. And as somebody who has I studied philosophy, and I'm like relatively well read, and I've read books about writing and so on. So I know a lot of rules for writing and for poetry. And when I approached visual art, I wanted to remove as much influence as possible and just like see what style I came up with. And I found that was what I ended up gravitating towards without reading about.
I was surprised when you said you had no visual art background before this, because a lot of these paintings, they're visual, but a lot of them look like you could see them as like giant paintings in like an art gallery.
Yeah, it sort of ended up that way. That seems to be a common response. I would love to put my stuff in a gallery. I just have no idea how to do that.
Have you thought? They do remind me of like airbrush work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I was in art school for a bit, and video synthesis in glitch art is big right now. It is huge, along with the whole vaporwave thing aesthetic that's going on. Right. And I had what's it called? It's called a Taichans. They're like this Orlando-based custom video synthesizer makers, and I had a $300 video synth called the Rainbow, and I did some video synthesis like 3 years ago with my own project called Pizza Dog Studios, and I would get the brave little toaster and manipulate the different colors. And it seems that video synthesis is getting very popular, and there's stuff like Lumen.
What scene in the film, was it the end scene where they're in?
No, it was a bunch of clips together where it was like this pretty and me working on the Korg MS-20 and making all this electronic stuff going on. But there are like video programs like Lumen Synth for the digital wise for the computer, and I'm very excited too. There's this one company called Teenage Engineering. They're making this instrument called the OPZ, which is basically a video synthesizer for the basic person getting into that, where you can just plug in any audio from analog to digital, and with these little buttons like a synthesizer, you can distort and create your own colorful image, as if now the screen and what you see is your canvas to work with, and you're making these Pollock paintings, or Pollock, I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. I'm gonna get Lumen. I'm gonna give that a shot.
It's definitely fun. It's just the manual for it's like you gotta at least invest in like 4 or 5 hours into it. It's on its full release right now, and some people have been making really crazy stuff with Lumen. But I think the hardware, it's now like synthesizers, right? It's like analog and digital. Now for video synthesizers, you can have the Teenage Engineering OPZ hardware or any of the Chichon video synths compared to the digital, which is Lumen, which is very popular at the moment. And I'm actually trying to learn how if I can like put that into iMovie and then twist it. It's kind of like a weird modular synth that I'm still learning about, but it is definitely a really cool hobby to get into.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I mean, I this reminds me of sort of like how I use Photoshop a lot. There's a way of approaching Photoshop use, I think, where you try to make an image of your own construction, but make it look as if it hasn't been altered, make it look very natural. And then there's another way to use it such that like images look incredibly warped and you kind of misuse the tools that are there or whatever. And that's, I guess that's how I make all of my visual art in Photoshop, and that's my approach to it, is like figuring out, like if I press a button, X number of times and have the settings set in this way, what strange thing comes about.
Did you do the one Whirlpool Cool Cat? I see on Facebook.
Yeah, I did.
That kind of, it's really cool. It has kind of aspects of like both the 80s inspired vaporwave, but also like a 60s like LSD inspired like artwork, psychedelic stuff.
Yeah, that's an example of a collab that I did with another artist. He approached me, and
is this with Sammy Static? Is the other artist?
Yeah, it is, right. He approached me and asked for sort of a half-finished piece with a whirlpool and clay figures, and then I asked him for a piece of a human figure coming out of a machine, and we kind of tried to finish each other's pieces that way.
The other one I see is In Living Stereo, and it's interesting, like the theme of kind of fusionism, because this one I see kind of the 80s influence, but it does remind me a lot of the like 30s era futurist posters, like even aspects of Italian futurism.
Yeah, actually, that's interesting that you brought it up. I made that piece after I had gone to an experimental film showing that focused on early uses of stereograms or stereographs, and that piece actually is, I don't know if you guys know what those are, but it's an example of one of those pieces where, like, if you let your eyes cross just in the right way, it goes 3D.
Yeah, I remember in elementary school, everyone had those books, and no one could see it. I think there was a Seinfeld episode, too.
Mishlev said that about your avatar later.
Oh, yeah, especially, yeah, I know what you're saying. If you go up to a certain anime character and look back, and then it's like, oh, is it two people in one? Yeah, I love those things, too.
Yeah, me too.
And a lot of the work also has a three-dimensional feeling.
Yeah, I worked with there's a way to make 3D models in Photoshop that I've been using a lot. Although I do want to sort of upgrade to stuff like Autodesk Maya, but the learning curve with software is sometimes just like really torturous when you try learning a new type of super complex software. Makes you feel like an idiot for a long time.
You're also reminds me of there was this old cheat program for the Nintendo 64. It was called Game Shark, and you could write possibly your own line of codes in it. So what some people would do, there's this whole Game Shark glitch community on YouTube where they'll get Super Mario 64, put it on the Game Shark cartridge, then write their own line of code, and then completely break up the music and the graphics. And like some of your mountains that you're doing, it reminds me of like the distorted imagery of Princess Peach's castle, and then with this Goomba Mario thing going about with all this crazy mishmash, as if something is broken internally within the game. It's just giving me that feel or something.
Yeah. I mean, I can totally see that. That I don't know enough about glitch art. I mean, because that sounds like a sort of an example of it, even though like it probably didn't go by that name at the time. To know sort of like the history of this style, but I started getting turned on to glitch art in 2009, and then I got super into vaporwave stuff in 2012 and 2013, and particularly the music at that time, though I didn't sort of know about the corresponding visual art aspect of it.
You grew up in the 80s, and did you have like an 80s nostalgia?
I didn't. None of like the graphical influences that you see there are because of personal nostalgia.
Because a lot of it does have a very 80s feel to it.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely see that. I think that comes from me reacting to artists that I like who themselves work with 80s nostalgia, if you follow.
And besides that, like I mentioned, there's 80s vaporwave. I also see the kind of influence of the sort of 60s psychedelic and 70s like psychedelic artwork.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think so. Working with a sort of like very early vaporwave idea, I try to take images of corporatism and specifically in the very, very recent 21st century, and try to sort of expose a kind of ugly feeling or a decay that's underneath them, in my mind philosophically, although a characteristic of like a lot of stock photos, for example, which I use heavily in my art, is that they're pristine and very clean. So that's sort of like, I think my work is very related to vaporwave and glitch art for sure, but specifically because of the philosophical basis of those art movements. And vaporwave now has sort of moved away from that and into sort of just meme culture. And
what's interesting about vaporwave is originally it started out as a critique of capitalism and consumerism. Right. Then it's become part of meme culture, but I think a lot of people are also attracted to it because it's visually appealing.
It is.
The aesthetic of it.
Yeah, it certainly is.
And obviously the people who created vaporwave, even though they were critiquing commercialism, they did put to create that, they did have to put a lot of artistic creativity into it. So they obviously wasn't just they were creating something they found visually appealing, despite the fact that they were also doing a social commentary.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know of Gerhard Richter?
I don't.
Okay, he's a very famous German artist of, I think his movement is called capitalist realism, and he's kind of known in for his VHS style glitch paintings in the 1950s or 60s. And if you do a Google search, I think I'm saying his name, Reichter, Rachter, and it reminds me he's kind of that godfather of glitch art, but he was all doing it with like silk screens and paintings. He's also well known because he did a lot of art for Sonic Youth on some of their album art, but Reichter's paintings sell for millions or dollars, and it's an old-fashioned glitch art if you compare it that wise.
Yeah, wow. I looked him up. This is really cool.
Mm-hmm. He's very of a famous guy, and I could see some of it looks like it'll look like a Pollock, but then it's like a broken VHS tape or something. He does it all physically, and that's amazing because now today we just have a computer and we could just do realistic images, and he was doing it as if you go it through like a VHS, and I think like you can make that comparison.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Do you have any major visual artists who are inspiration on you?
As far as like, see, I think particularly to me, because of the way that I went about doing visual art, I tried to restrict the amount of work that I was looking at during this time. So I tried to sort of reduce who I was, basing stuff on and being influenced by to develop a personal style very, very unique to me, albeit, obviously related to the other forms of media that I love and I couldn't have like removed from my memory at the time. But most of my influence is philosophic and in film or TV. Like, for example, Black Mirror is a huge influence of mine, as is Pascal or Roberto Bolaño. And you'll notice there are a lot of quotes. There are a lot of titles of my pieces that are quotes from Pascal or Bolaño or Black Mirror. But I think, I wish I feel like I'm being dishonest there because there's like so many clear comparisons from my work to other artists. But I think stuff like The Ambassadors, which is a 16th century painting, or Bosch, Hieronymus Bosch, like really old artists that make like ultra bizarre work. Those are.
Hieronymus Bosch was remarkable because he was a Renaissance era painter, but he was way ahead of his time.
Right.
Do you like James Turrell?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, okay, because I can see that the person, when he's in a Turrell lighting place, you kind of interact, and I feel like, is there ever going to be like an interaction with your art? I mean, for now, it's like it's on.
Yeah, James Turrell right now, I can definitely see that.
Like with your paintings, it's like it's on the wall, but for Turrell, you interact with it.
Right.
Do you think
I would love to. So something that I'm working on right now is doing augmented reality stuff with my work. And I'm new to that scene, but I'm working with a few developers to try to get my work featured and like tagged in various places. So I don't know if you guys know the game like Pokemon Go, but it would be something sort of like that where you'd wander around, with glasses or your iPhone or something.
Oh, yeah.
Stumble upon a piece.
Previously on the show, we had Andy Looney. He is a game designer, and his game is Pyramid Arcade, where it's this box of avant-garde glass pyramids, and supposedly there's really no rules, and rather you have to make up the rules to it, or people make up the meaning to the pieces itself, and rather the player becomes into the art pace. The same with the game Cosmic Encounter, this old board game from 78, and it's basically a game that predates around the same time as Dungeons and Dragons, where it's just these saucer pieces, and then you particularly play as a role as this alien, but really the rules are not there. It's just you messing with the medium of the art piece, and you have to distinguish between, you know, a game that you play of basketball or baseball or Super Mario compared to an avant-garde art piece of Andy Looney's Pyramid Arcade or Cosmic Encounter. And I feel as though in your art, there can be this fine line. If you were to do a Pokemon Go game, it says as if you interact with the piece, and people get a certain aesthetic feel to it, the same way they walk into a James Turrell piece.
Yeah.
Later, you did mention James Turrell in a previous show. I'm trying to forget. Was it the
that
one
was
with
Andy Looney?
Andy Looney.
Andy
What was
Looney.
you get the context?
Exactly, because with Andy Looney's games, you're not in control of it. You are interacting with his art piece, and it becomes this aesthetic-wise. You're not a gamer, you're just a spectator enjoying fine art. And I see this with some art, you know, pieces, especially in this postmodern era, where if there was like a film, a TV on the wall of just like experimental film, we, you know, put that out, we distance ourselves from it, or either we embrace it from it, and it gives a person a certain feeling or a certain emotion. I think that's a really cool thing, especially if you could do it with games or a form of play. I don't know.
Makes a lot of sense.
Oh, I really like this one, Flower House. It's very surreal, very dreamlike. One side, it also does have a kind of, it looks like a kind of house you'd see in maybe New Orleans. One side is dark, and one side is dark with the light flower, and it's in black and white, and the other side is colorful with clouds, and it really has that otherworldly dream feel.
Yeah, that's one of the earliest pieces I did. That I think was one of the first examples of me finding like just how experimental I could be with Photoshop. I was using photos that a buddy of mine took, and it's the same photo of a house all the way across the back there, but there's a picture of the sky superimposed on the left half of the piece, such that the porch light reflects through like it was like a sun through the cloud, and then that creates a contrast between the light and dark there.
Do you have a strong interest in architecture?
I do, yeah. I don't know enough about it though. I wish I knew more.
Do you have like a favorite style or genre or era in architecture?
I mean, I love Gothic architecture. I think I particularly like making fun of brutalist architecture more than I have like a specific interest in modern architecture. You know, if you've ever seen the movie Playtime, that's a great film. That is it's a French movie that's has almost no dialogue, but it's a comedy. And a heavy critique of brutalist architecture.
It seems like everyone likes to make fun of brutalist architecture.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's an easy target.
But it really depends. I mean, it depends how it does. I think it can work if it's done the right way. There's a lot of different types of brutalism. Yeah,
for sure.
Are you more of a futurist or a traditionalist as far as architecture goes?
I'd say traditionalist, but I don't want to posture here like I really know what I'm talking about with architecture. I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's something that I can't. I'll redirect because I don't want to get caught in.
You have this piece, Foreplay,
mm-hmm.
and it's very intense colors. It has like the black and like the peach color, kind of like a skin tone, turquoises, pinks, purples. But on one hand, it looks like a seashell, but then if you look at it on a different angle, it's like a face.
Yeah.
That's very like a Bauhaus or some retro futurist kind of piece looking at. Interesting, a very of a.
Oh, that's what I was saying about like architecture. Some of his work does remind me of retrofuturism. Like, have you ever seen those Italian futurist illustrations of cities?
Yeah, for sure.
Are you a fan of those?
There. I am, yeah.
Yeah, futurist or the Russian constructivists. That's kind of reminds me of the vibes I'm getting from this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I had recently watched Metropolis before making this, so that definitely. I think that you're keying into something that's definitely there.
Is it kind of it reminds me of I'm getting the vibes from Tamara di Lampica. That's kind of another thing I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
I'd like to kind of get your thoughts on kind of the effects of capitalism on culture and aesthetics. I know you come from more of a kind of Marxist background, but was interesting. I forget who. I think it was Rabbit who said this, that in the 20th century, as far as aesthetics go, capitalism had a sense of kind of a innocence to it, because putting the economic theories aside, just as far as aesthetics go, like we had like the early 20th century, there was original Beaux Arts, there was the kind of Art Deco of the 20s and 30s, there was the 50s and mid-century modern, and then there was kind of like 70s futurism and even a lot of the 80s design. And for the 20th century, we had this like capitalist period where we were reinventing ourselves each decade, but there was a lot of cultural innovation, and now it seems that there's been a kind of stagnation where everything in corporations has gotten to the point where before things were capitalistic, but they'd hire like a really innovative architect to design a building, or a really innovative designer to do an illustration. But now capitalism has gotten like so technical that everything has gotten to the point where it's so formulaic that it's lost that quality to it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. That's a hard question. So you're asking specifically about like the interplay between aesthetics and capitalism, right?
Yes.
So I guess I see this like move in digital UIs and how websites are presented and some stuff, so that there's like a increased focus on cleanliness, but also this like hyper saturated, bizarre, like almost overwhelming amount of colors. One of the things that I look at a lot is like if you go on Facebook and you look up a type of candy and find their Facebook page where they advertise or something like Sour Patch Kids, and look at their cover photo, I find like those sorts of images to be like incredibly odd and almost sinister. I guess that's my experience with this sort of thing, like more so than architecture. Like I could talk about like the kind of like wretchedly barren grayness of like the cubicle or whatever, but I don't know how interesting I can be on that subject.
I just sent you 2 pictures, but
Sure.
What do you think about like this kind of a genre of like Soviet 70s retro futurist illustrations? Because it's kind of interesting is you have these different economic systems like communism and capitalism, but within those systems you can still have great creativity can exist within different economic systems.
Yeah, that's true. I love these illustrations. These are really beautiful. So there's a longstanding question for me whether or not the internet and capitalism generally has destroyed art or has just made it really hard to find, like great art, that is. Because I mean, I guess you see this in writing and all art forms, but I don't know if it's always been the case that like everything you see in a gallery looks the same, or if I'm just uneducated as far as visual art goes to make that claim. But there definitely seems to be like a shrinking of great thought, and sort of a movement towards like cleanliness and shine and like sexy design rather than things that are like really special.
Part of the themes, you told me that themes in your work consist of the failures of neoliberalism, things like, and also issues like global warming, automation, depression, and like mass consumerism. You touch upon a lot of those themes in your work. Can you give some examples?
Yeah, sure. So I did a piece called "There Will Be No Prejudice in the Warm World," which is sort of a dig at an issue that I see in identity politics, or the New Left particularly. I see some serious issues regarding automation and global warming coming at like a dramatically fast rate, even though, we keep saying 50 years out or whatever. But nonetheless, the left seems to be most focused on issues of social justice. So I'm taking a dig at the left there by sort of drawing attention to like, when.
I know where you're getting at. Because Hillary Clinton made this famous comment. She says, it doesn't matter. She was addressing like Bernie Sanders supporters. She says, it doesn't matter if we break up the big banks, if we still have like racism and sexism or something like that.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Well, I think where I originally came across you on Facebook is you were posting in one of the alt-left groups.
Yeah. Although I'm not explicitly alt-left. I'm just I'm particularly interested in what's going on there. I mean, I think like right now the political climate, we got this one shining moment when Donald Trump won the election and the left was forced to look at the fact that they were wrong. I don't think that they learned from it, but I think that they were at least drastically weakened. And so like this has sort of like opened up a space for the left to reinvent itself. And I hope that it happens quickly, because if it doesn't, I can't imagine what's going to happen is going to be good. But so like I've been looking at the alt left, which isn't my thing, but is obviously growing a lot in popularity, as well as other places that have been trying to redefine leftism, or moved back to like the old left and reject identity politics.
Have you ever checked out Verso Books?
Yes, I have.
What do you think about them?
I don't know enough. I wish I did. They're on my reading list as like something that I've liked on Facebook but haven't gotten to.
Yes, because
I've spent. Yeah, go ahead.
Because Verso Books is probably the established "quote unquote" new left, starting off from Benedict Anderson, and from there, now that they have Zizek and Jacobin Mag, And especially that they are trying to make it very stylish and I would say is probably the last thing of what you would probably call a left today in proper sense. But at the same time, it is, there's the struggle between its identity there.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think Jacobin seems to be like I'm really happy that they exist. They're much better than
The Nation.
Thought, yeah, than thought pieces, or Salon, or whatever the hell.
There's also
do you think the modern left, they're more concerned like about issues dealing with political correctness or what offends people rather than the sort of serious economic issues like automation and income inequality?
Yeah, so that's a good question. That sort of gets to the heart of what I think is wrong with the left. So I think the left refused to make an economic argument when they focus on privilege. But privilege at its base is an economic issue. But in refusing to discuss economic issues, they confront the alt-right. And the alt-right is basically saying, right, like, now you're imposing prejudice on groups that you say like are so privileged that it can't touch them, but it obviously does. And the left comes back and says, well, no, it's an economic issue, and the alt-right and the right generally says like, yeah, that's what we've been saying, and now the left has tied itself into knots, because I think economic issues are at the base of social ones, and on the topic of automation, there's kind of something extremely frightening that I found, that there are almost no economists doing research on the real effects of automation. The next book on my reading list is The Age of M, which I wish I had already read so I could talk about it more, but it's on the Oxford University Press, and it's giving an account of when robots rule the world and humans become obsolete, which I think, according to the author, is not so far away. But other less sort of like way out there, kooky sounding predictions are a few papers that seem very conservative, but nonetheless say that we'll see unemployment rates at 40% in 10 to 15 years due to automation, which is horrifying. And nobody seems to be talking about it.
That was one of the big issues with the election, is both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump were major critics of a free trade, and Hillary Clinton was a major supporter of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and Obama was. And that's been a huge issue, is like manufacturing jobs overseas. But even if depending on what Trump does, let's say even if he is successful at bringing back jobs from overseas, automation's going to sort of replace outsourcing as the major economic issue in like 20 years from now.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. While I think issues of manufacture and the TPP and so on are like incredibly important issues, they distract from. You're right that automation will be the same thing, and there isn't really any escaping from it in the way that I don't know of any way to combat it in the way that we could with pulling back manufacturing jobs or some such policy.
I think automation is inevitable, but it really depends how we deal with it. Like the nightmare scenario is the corporations loot all the revenues from the profits of automation, and basically the people are basically forced to starve, or they could give them a basic income of something of like a measly amount that would just sort of have like 10,000, 12,000 a year that would just barely subside them. Then there is something like a kind of futurist utopia where robots do all the work and people would have all their needs taken care of.
Yeah,
that sounds amazing, but that would be very difficult to achieve.
Yeah,
So,
I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, or like my personal opinion is the universal basic income is like really the only hope that we have on that front. We'll see.
But I think what's most likely is there'll be some kind of a compromise, like the middle ground. Will the elites will let people have a basic income to prevent them from totally revolting, but at the same time there'll be a massive decline, so they'll no longer have these middle class jobs. They'll get a basic income, but it'll be like poverty level of like 12,000 a year.
Right. Yeah, and I think it'll be really interesting to see like what happens when your labor force is not the people who you're paying, you know? Like, I don't know what that does to the value of the dollar as, or like money generally as a sort of a symbol, like a symbol of labor.
Can you talk about the influence of issues like pollution and global warming play in your artwork?
Yeah, so I started doing a little bit of research in global warming by reading the sort of pamphlets and things that get published out of the Intergovernmental Committee on Climate Change, and they have all their information and scientific journals and whatnot available on their website. And I did a bunch of reading through them, and I started finding that according to their science, which one can dispute or not, I won't really make that argument, but if you buy into empiricism generally and science generally, like which I will for the sake of this conversation, it looks like we have a 40 to 70% of surveyed species going extinct as soon as we get to 3.5 degrees Celsius above the line that was set in the 80s. And I think we're at 2 or almost 2.5 now. So I watched Leonardo DiCaprio's film Before the Flood or whatever. And it's remarkably hopeful, but I don't see enough people talking about like just how drastically apocalyptic this will be according to scientific arguments. As far as my art goes, I have a hard time remaining hopeful in times like these. So I guess like when global warming and pollution come into my artwork, they tend to be either expressed through a kind of like nihilistic, ironic tone, like there'll be no prejudice in the warm world, because it's hard for me personally, even though I hate nihilism, it's hard for me to not be nihilistic in the face of stuff like that. And then on the other end, there's just sort of this like great despair and dread, which I think if you take it seriously, one has to feel when faced with subjects that are that serious and horrifying.
And you also touch on psychological themes like depression in your work.
Yeah. Let me see if I can pull up a good example. I think there's one that hits on all three of these. Judgment, which is a woman, a pregnant woman, sort of trapped inside an ATV. I'll send you a link to it. this is one of my favorite pieces. I think so. There is beauty here in that the curves of the woman's figure are particularly beautiful, and they align beautifully with the shape of the machine. But I'd affirm that this is a piece that focuses primarily on the grotesque. So you can see her downcast eyes, which appear extremely silent, although the machine itself is kind of a gauche, loud, excessive example of capitalist excess. And she's trapped within it. And her pose is not something that I imagine is easy to hold. I can see her knees, her shins, her arms growing tired and hurting, and so on and so forth. So I think there's like,
to me, it kind of represents the feeling of claustrophobia and being trapped.
Right. There are issues of mental health there, definitely in this piece, as well as automation and so on, in very obvious ways. But I don't want to explain like everything about the piece, but I find that my best work is stuff that forces you to look at things that are unattractive or ugly, rather than reaching for the beautiful, which obviously I do with my minimalist work, but it's not the stuff that I find most interesting.
Do you have any philosophers that were major influences on you? And what is your general philosophical outlook towards life? I mean, on the one hand, you have the kind of like a nihilism and misanthropy, and you have the kind of a like hippie mentality. Would you say, what is your general sort of philosophical outlook towards life?
Yeah, I think the two people who influenced me most are Hegel and Pascal. If I were to sort of put a philosophy of life briefly, I'd borrow from Pascal, where he says something along the lines of, life is like a man rushing towards a cliff but holding up a board in front of his face. I try to face all the things that we generally ignore as thoroughly as I can. But that also pushes me towards Christianity or theism as a kind of like the only relief to a world that I see as like extremely brutal. I will note that I think that nihilism is that we live in the age of nihilism, and I think it's like a really horrible thing and a cause for a lot of bad shit that goes on these days, and a lot of like lack of intellectual rigor and creativity in art. On the topic of nihilism, I'd suggest anybody take a look at Mitchell Heisman's Suicide Note, which is a really interesting piece of philosophy, which focuses on the origin of modern Western thought and its movement into nihilism in the modern age. I try my best to be an embodiment against that and treat art like a war against nihilism. I think that the artist, as the creative, ought to believe in God or move people to believe in God. But I really don't know. I think I'm remarkably Christian for an atheist, if I can put it that way.
Huh. So you're saying Christian in a philosophical sense, but not in a literal theological sense.
Yeah, like I want to believe, and I try to. But
so you're sort of saying like, or agnostic, but wanting Christianity to be true.
Yeah.
I understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've spent a lot of time. I recently got sober, but when I was drinking, I spent a lot of time wandering around in the middle of the streets, sort of like yelling out for like God to explain things to me. I think depression and addiction have a, obviously there's the phrase rock bottom or whatever, but they have a way of accelerating, I think, what Pascal tries to do, which is to make you like thoroughly destitute of mind and then provide you like the one out, which is God. And I think if you really face kind of the horrors of the world, or at least I hope this is the case, that you'll have that God moment. I'm trying, but I haven't yet.
You mentioned earlier you were a fan of Black Mirror. We touched on that briefly. Can you get into that more?
Sure. I think any sci-fi that is particularly philosophically rigorous is very interesting to me, as opposed to like, the run-of-the-mill stuff you see on the Sci-Fi Channel. But I found Black Mirror to be really special insofar as the best sci-fi is when you allow humans to interact as they do and sort of introduce the element of a new technology. So you get episodes like Be Right Back, where a boyfriend has died and a woman sort of buys into an AI version of him based on all of his social media.
What's interesting is there is this same theme in a lot of them of like psychological torment or psychological torture, which is also featured in a lot of horror films.
Right, yeah. I think anything that forces us to have the discussion about like the horror that we're creating through technology and just like modern society, I think is useful. We're not having the discussion enough about the ramifications of AI or any of these things. And the plot of the episode that I alluded to, Be Right Back, is literally happening. You have a female CEO who's trying to make a artificial intelligence copy of her lover, which I find particularly horrifying for reasons that are expressed in that episode. But a lot of people seem to be rejoicing about, but I find it very strange and something that we ought to like really look at and then try our best to avoid.
I was thinking about, was reading up on Imagined Communities by Benedict Anderson, and I was just thinking of these things about the Verso books and some of the theories you were just saying, especially through the, I haven't seen the show, but thinking of the science fiction ideal that especially in this age of nihilism, we are becoming isolated, and things are based upon an internet identity than reality, which supersedes. You do more powerful things using a computer, playing a fictional social video game, than actually meeting person in life, which is amazing because it also helps the unfortunate person who's probably an introvert do more powerful things.
Right.
It's definitely going to change philosophy in the future, and it's definitely, I think, I kind of look at it as a good thing because, for one, not to sound like I want some like snarky revenge against the nerd, the jocks or something, but it's this ideal that the nerd is winning over the jock, and people who think that it's all about reality and meeting people, when in fact that it is the internet and it is things that happen. It has the cultural ground. It could also said that there have been saying that the alt-right has made Donald Trump has won, or that internet memes or meme magic or the power of Keck is certainly something that's happening, and that's all because of the internet. And so when you have like people saying we got to save the book industry, well, there is no purpose to save the book industry because the internet does a better job of transferring information.
It's interesting point. It's a concept of like a free markets. I mean, with the internet, it's not a total free market because you have these big corporations like Google and Amazon and Facebook, but it's more of a free market than the generic economy, non-internet economy. Because with the generic economy, you have to go through these institutions like the university, then the corporation. At least the internet, it does give people a chance to become their own kind of independent entrepreneurs and get their stuff out there independently.
Right.
I think there's more authenticity now on the internet than when you meet people in person, as when people are in person, they put up they wear certain clothes, they hang out with certain people, or they put on a facade as if this is what they portray. One, like the internet, you don't have to worry about those stresses. And so it makes me think in the future, this weird Judge Dredd kind of future. Are we going to be locked in our little cubicles, putting on these virtual reality goggles and pretending we're all anime characters and own fictional narratives, and basically the outside world is this weird cyberpunk necromunda, disgusting-looking place? I don't know. It's something to think about, though.
Yeah, I don't know either. It is certainly something to think about. I mean, from a performance art perspective, I try to sort of treat the internet as like a place to explore and meet people and sort of like discover things about human beings, myself, and culture. And I find it really magical, but I also have no idea what it is. One of the things that I find really bizarre about the internet is how we've all sort of agreed that it's not real. You know, the acronym IRL to refer to in real life as opposed to online, and that dichotomy is pervasive whenever we discuss the internet. But I can't think of any other invention in human history that we speak about that way. You know, that we treat as unreal, or any medium of communication that we treat as specifically unreal. I try to think about the internet as being a part of my real life, and just the experiences that I have via the internet are different. But yeah, I don't know. These are all really good questions and things to think about.
You did mention earlier one of your favorite artists is Hieronymus Bosch. Mm-hmm. Can you comment more on Bosch's work?
Yeah, I wish I knew more about that style. But I'll use the Garden of Earthly Delights as an example. I like anything that forces us to look at what we're reaching for, or what we want to have or could have, and contrast that with the horrors of the world that inevitably come.
And I'm not sure if he was coming at it more from the sort of theological view of the afterlife, but it could be viewed in the context of heaven and hell and the afterlife, but also can be viewed in the context of like utopianism and dystopianism in our world.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would posit that Bosch is using the Bible directly as an inspiration for his work here. But I think that you're right that the subject matter of this work is directly applicable to notions of utopianism and futurism, things like a contrast between a sort of future Sparta where the robots do all the work as opposed to slaves in Sparta, but the robots do all the work, and we live in a time of plenty and supposed scarcity, or a kind of like polluted global warming and impoverished future. I mean, the reason for I find these themes in general to be incredibly relevant today, and I wish people would talk about the Bible anymore. But that's
I think part of it is I've touched on this theme with Andy Nowicki, who's a Christian writer. A lot of them kind of mainstream. If you look at most artists today, a lot of the greatest artists are fairly secular, and they associate maybe like Christian culture with a lot of this like a lot of these like cheesy kind of like movies and like mega churches. But I mean, Bosch obviously was coming at it. He was coming at it from a Christian perspective, and his work is very inspirational. And you just look at the Garden of Earthly Delights, and that's something that, I mean, I'd like to see that kind of implemented in real life. to build like a city like that where you have like
naked people.
Naked people. And
you're gonna get an erection near a girl all the time, and she doesn't care. Maybe some Asian girls too.
And those like buildings, the pink buildings and the big blue. I was gonna say blue balls, but that wouldn't come out the wrong way. They do remind me of like perfume bottles, actually, too.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
And it's also kind of interesting, the kind of portrayal. There's also kind of a hedonistic element about it as well, of the sort of naked people swimming together. I guess some people there's different interpretations of heaven, and some people view heaven like it's like there's this interpretation of heaven as it's just about having a connection to God, but no earthly pleasures, like sensual pleasures about sex or food.
Right. Yeah. I find Bosch's realization of I guess the garden particularly interesting. Like, you have people gripping massive fruit and biting into it, and like these like really intense displays of something I guess you could call hedonism, or like a complete sort of like throwing oneself into bodily pleasures. Milton, I think, also has that in Paradise Lost, where Adam and Eve have a lot of sex, and obviously that contrasts with puritanical images of the Garden of Eden.
And it's kind of interesting in our culture, like the hippies. They had this kind of utopia where people would just be like, people would come together and be free and have like free love and all this. Right. And it sounded like a great idea, but then we kind of ended up to where we are now, where people are very like atomized, and a lot of people are disconnected from one another, and there are a lot of depression. And I mean, a lot of those ideas, I mean, those people that came out of the hippie generation, those are kind of the same people who are in positions of political and economic power today.
Right. Yeah, I really don't like the 1960s. I like psychedelia for sure, but I think there are a lot of things wrong with the 60s.
We are at the end of the show. I would like to thank Epiphora for being on. It's been an excellent show.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Also, thanks, Pillator.
Awesome.
I had a lot of fun.